Good morning, everyone. It's Wednesday, May 19th, and uh, this morning we're going to be talking about education inequity in Cambridge. Why are we still here? Um, this conversation is hosted in, I'm hosting this in partnership with Cambridge Community Foundation um, as another of the series of conversations arising from the publication of Cambridge Community Foundation's recent research report, Equity and Innovation Cities, the Case of Cambridge, which we talked about in early April. There have been further conversations, and these will continue over the next couple of months, about the work coming out of the report. Um, Today we're focusing on the report's data and analysis on focusing on gaps in educational achievement and opportunity and goal setting for Black and Brown Cambridge students that translate into gaps in opportunities to participate in Cambridge's innovation economy and the ability of those students to continue to live and thrive in Cambridge. Um, as I said, the education gaps are not only in achievement, but also in goals. The city's and the school's budget and documents indicate that we, as a city, are not even expecting our Black and Brown students to be able to achieve what our white students will achieve academically, which I hope you join me in believing is unconscionable. We need to do better, much, much, much better. Uh, Today's conversation, as I mentioned, will be the first in a number. Specifically, today's conversation, which is focusing on why are we still here after decades of trying to make a difference in inequities in Cambridge schools, um, will be most closely followed by a conversation tomorrow evening on Thursday, May 20th from 6:30 to 8 p.m., moderated by my brother's Keeper Cambridge Task Force. Um, that is part of their Public Square conversation series. And I've included the information on how to get into that Zoom in my letter, and we'll put that in the chat as well. And I hope you will take part in that. That conversation is a follow-up to this in that it's focused again on educational disparities in Cambridge schools, but is going to be very forward-looking. What are we going to do about it? The clock starts now. How do we move to seeing measurable progress within the next 3 years? Today's conversation is going to be led by Caroline Hunter, the retired assistant principal of Cambridge Rindge and Latin School, one of the founders of Benjamin Banneker Charter School, and a longtime teacher at Cambridge Rindge and Latin School. Ayesha Wilson, Cambridge School Committee, Rachel Weinstein, Cambridge School Committee, Carrie Milner, co-director of Cambridge Agenda for Children and one of the team leaders of Building Equity Bridges, which we had a discussion about last summer, and Gita Pradhan, president of Cambridge Community Foundation. We are also joined this morning by, I'll reintroduce you to Adrian Wallace, who is the new director of grant making and programs at Cambridge Community Foundation. Adrian will co-moderate the conversation this morning. Some of you, I hope many of you will remember meeting Adrian last summer when she came and spoke about her work creating the program, the nonprofit Underground, to serve formerly incarcerated youth, and creating a bond program, a bail program for youth under 18 who had been incarcerated. In addition to that, Adrian was a Teach for America math teacher, who over her 2 years was able to get help 92% of her students meet the state math testing standards, and reached 100% family engagement with her students. She's since been Dean of Academics at Magnolia Science Academy in California, and Assistant Principal and Dean of Students at Up Academy Kennedy in Springfield, Mass. We're so excited to have Adrian join us join Cambridge Community Foundation as the Director of Grant Making and Programs. And so I'm very excited that she's joining the conversation today. As normal in my letter, there are a number of resources to read, listen, or watch about the conversation today, as well as upcoming events. The Loop Lab is going to be presenting this evening, this afternoon from 3:30 to 5:30 on Social Innovator Forum. That's in there as well. And there are other links to events coming up. So with that, though, I'd like to start this morning's conversation with Geeta Pradhan, President of Cambridge Community Foundation, who will set out and describe some of the findings from the recent report. Geeta, would you join in?
Yes, I thank you very much, Lori. I can share my screen. There you go. Oops. Yep, one moment. And put it on the slide mode. Oops. Won't let me open my. Just give me one moment. I'm having a little bit of a technical thing, but yes, okay. Can you see my screen?
We see you, but not your screen.
Okay. Let's try to do the screen share again. Okay, you can see my screen now, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So good morning, everyone. And thank you, Lori, for hosting this really important conversation to help us recognize that what's at stake here is not just a generation of children, but it's about the future of generations to come. So our recent report, Equity and Innovation Cities, and I apologize to some of you who may have seen some portion of this presentation. I think this one is a much more targeted one. So bear with me. The data shows that there's growing prosperity in Cambridge, which is not being shared. And if anything, disparities are persistent and they're growing. So I've therefore organized this presentation in two parts. The first part sets up the prosperity context within which disparities exist. And the second part focuses on educational outcomes for children and implications for their future. And I think it's really important to see the prosperity within which disparities occur, because one, it is unacceptable. And the other one is that it tells you that we have a lot of resources in this community, financial, intellectual, people resources, that if any city can conquer its problems, it should be Cambridge. So overall, the snapshot of our findings is, this is a city where innovation thrives. People come up with new ideas and new discoveries all the time. And when we look at ourselves in the context of other cities, Cambridge is a leader amongst several innovation cities. Our position today was built over a dynamic decade from 2009 to 2019, marked by innovation and growth. However, the resulting prosperity that happened was not shared equally. Disparities across income and race which have been fairly persistent, have grown, and they were exacerbated by the pandemic. These disparities compel us to look deeper at exploration and action for Cambridge's Black and brown children, because they are at jeopardy. So the new Cambridge that is emerging is absolutely thriving in the innovation economy. We are, when we compare ourselves with 25 cities, we rank at or near the top on almost all metrics of competitive advantage. We are number one in the innovation employment sector. We are number one, the most highly educated population with more PhDs than any other city. We are number two in growth of our knowledge workers, and we are fourth highest and fastest, and have the fastest growth in household median income. What that results in is this immense prosperity and an immensely resource-rich city where 1 in 5 people earn over 200,000 per year for a combined annual earnings of about 5 billion, an economy that generates 18 billion in wages, and property that is valued at 32 billion as the city attracts more people. But there are deep inequities in income. We've looked at the city by groups of 20% or quintiles, and the first quintile collectively earns 2.25% of the total income, while the top quintile earns over 50% of the total income. And these disparities also exist across race. If you look at the first two columns are actually all of Cambridge, and you see the growth from 2010 to 2018. And the next one is Black Cambridge, and you see that there's a $62,000 gap in income between Black and all Cambridge households. As I mentioned earlier, that we've looked at Cambridge by income quintiles, and I'm just going to very briefly touch on these to give you a sense of how varied these income quintiles are. The first quintile, average household income is about 13,000. It goes up to 30,000, but average at 13,000. It's ethnically the most diverse. It has a large share of single parent households and a large share of elders. The second cohort is mostly immigrants. And you see in this cohort where average household income is about 50,000, that there's very quick credentialing and recent home ownership, something to learn from our immigrant neighbors. The third quintile is what I call the changing Cambridge. It's mobile millennials, younger people who are attracted by the innovation economy, who are actually replacing the traditional middle class of families with children who we are losing in Cambridge. The fourth quintile is the quintessential, innovation workforce, and the top quintile is mostly people who are professionals. This is the highest income quintile, and interestingly, this is the other place where you see a concentration of children. So when we stack these quintiles against each other, a few very glaring facts emerge. One is that our children are polarized at the very bottom and the very top. So 32% are in the top two quintiles and 28% are in the bottom two quintiles. And our middle is largely millennials, which, by the way, we are losing our Black millennials as they go to other places to seek opportunity. They also reveal these, sorry, one moment, I need to go up. Okay, so you see the income disparities, and you also see these disparities and inequities across race, where 80% of the top quintile is white and 52% of the bottom quintile are people of color, with 40% of the Black population concentrated in the two bottom quintiles. The bottom quintile, or the first quintile, also has an extremely high cost burden for the lowest income households. And we see that 95% of the top quintile are homeowners, and 63% of the bottom quintile are renters. So, whether it's short-term or long-term wealth and ownership, this is where it is concentrated. Uh, and educational disparities continue to hamper the opportunity gap. And in a city where across the board 81% have bachelor's degrees, we see that 45% of the adults in the bottom quintile have a bachelor's degree or higher. This could be skewed by the fact that we have graduate students in that. And 90% of the adults in the top quintile have a bachelor's degree or higher. So there's a 100% sort of jump. When we looked at all of this data across and we saw these persistent racial equities, this is what we were not planning to, but we actually ended up doing a deeper dive on Black Cambridge. And simply because our goal was to look at issues of equity and justice. And from that perspective, it seemed very important to take a look at this. And this is a community, when we looked a little historically, of course, we are not the experts, but in our conversations and interviews with several people, including the Cambridge Historical Society and Ken Reeves and many leaders in the Black community, things that emerged was that there was a community that had done very well at the turn of the 20th century and up into the 1970s and 80s had enjoyed high rates of homeownership. But data in this report presents stark disparities for the Black community in present day Cambridge. So I'm going to now focus a little bit on the education data, where you see that Cambridge Public School enrollment has grown, but the share of Black students has declined. 23% CPS students are Black. Now, this decline in population could be a function of two things. One is the loss of population, because we know that we've lost some in the middle, but also because overall, the Black population has not grown, it has stagnated, while other populations have grown. And we see that educational disparities arise early, and they persist through the later years. And this was sort of a surprising thing to see that, third grade reading scores are at 44%. And of course, this is not the same cohort followed because this is the same year. You see the comparison with Cambridge Public Schools at 68% and across Massachusetts at 56%. And you see that in 10th grade, it has actually dropped. So the importance of looking at, maybe tracking students through the years to see what is the result of these deep early gaps in education. In addition, we see that the data points to a lack of preparedness for participation in Cambridge's knowledge-based economy. So 8th grade math, 10th grade math, and in fact, we have not included the science scores there, but you see that in the science scores as well. And the choices that it limits for our young people, I have to say, this shocked me to see that 40 out of 430 CRLS AP test takers were Black students, only 40. This lack of opportunity then and disparities then follow students through college, work, and life. And you see that for the adult sector, the educational disparities, with people with a third of the population holding bachelor's degree and the rest of the population holding less than a college degree, than even some college, which in sense actually determines your access to the innovation economy. Just yesterday, I was in a conversation with someone who said that hiring managers in the innovation sector go for talent and people who are applying for jobs from elite schools as well as highly credentialed, even though a job may not require a college degree. It is going to those with college degrees when it could go to others. But what you see is that only 4.6% of Black adults are employed in the innovation economy, when overall the participation of Cambridge residents in the innovation economy is at 22%. And I wanted to bring back this slide about the income gap because it starts with families. I wanted to say, and that's basically, the bulk of the presentation. This report is actually pretty extensive. It's pretty rich. We would encourage you to actually go to the website. It's web-based. You can download copies. We can also send you hard copies.
I just included a copy in the chat as well.
And I did want to say one thing in closing, that the data that we are presenting here are simply this. It simply states the facts. We started out on a journey on understanding equity in our city, and the data took us, and we allowed the data to take us where it took us. As your community foundation, we are actually a very neutral entity, and we try to be a very neutral entity, to be the connector, the convener, and a catalyst for change. And that requires us to be as neutral as we can. But the data just absolutely tells us that if we want to fix our equity gaps, we need to be serious, determined, and intentional about data-driven strategies that close the achievement gap for our Black and Brown children. So with that, thank you. And I really look forward to hearing from the experts about why are we still here.
Thank you, Gita. Thank you. I think I'm going to take off. Gita, if you can close your screen sharing, that would be great.
Do that.
And Caroline Hunter, can I pass over to you to bring you into the conversation?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the report. It's nothing new.
Yeah.
This is what the Concerned Black staff did not quite 40 years ago, but in the 80s, around the tale of two cities, and the tale has gotten worse and more glaring. And we're here because we haven't done anything about it. Change, while it may take time, it takes leadership, vision, and courage, and we need that in all sectors. We need it in our hirings, in people who are challenged to lead our schools, both originally with the leadership, I always say starts at the top, but certainly we need that. We need it on our school committee. But we also need it in other segments of our community, those people who are challenged to work with our teams. So we also need targeted services. We've over many, participated in so many studies in Cambridge. The list is telling, whether it's the Mayor's Commission on counting down and its resources, talented resources, whether it's universities and now the biotech sector. And that was years ago. The study on Black boys by Ken Reeves. So those are telling. And I will say that I have a dual degree in Cambridge, or of expertise as an educator, 34 years in Cambridge Public Schools, from a Chapter 1 teacher to an MCAS prep, SAT prep, college prep teacher, to leading the Student Service Center, which was responsible at one time as the lifeblood of the school for clubs and activities. And 5 years later, the assistant principal, where you do everything but wash the windows, but you supervise the people who wash the windows. But my other expertise is as a parent. My daughter matriculated from my expertise is deep and my knowledge is wide and my distress is concerned. I'm also a founder of the Benjamin Banneker Charter School, because my child was in a Cambridge public school and wasn't getting an adequate education in science. So I won't bore you with my background, but I think we have the resources. I think we need the things I talked about, the leadership, the vision, and the courage. The courage is really often lacking. The targeted service and models, whether you want to look at Jeffrey Canada's Children's Zone, which he's been brought into Cambridge to consult. Ken Reeves brought him in, to meaningful linkages with our resources. And of course, the first thing that we have to go back to do, which the Concerned Black staff made the district do, is publish the data. because it's telling. Just this number that MBK has out, 44% of Black third graders met or exceeded grade level expectations compared to their 80% of their white and Asian counterparts. If you look at the Concerned Black Staff Report, it talks about that tale of two cities, and that's where we are. And so the question is, what is the will in the Cambridge public school system to deal with the gap, despite the numbers or because of the numbers? And how do we do our resources? How do we modernize our high schools so we have a career center? So that, and career education should be starting, certainly, it should be parallel to kindergarten education, but certainly should be starting in the 4th grade. How do we have an aggressive literacy program so that we target our kids pre-K so that they're reading by the time they get to school, that there are books in the home, that there's an aggressive literacy program for parents as well? Are we smart enough to capitalize on Zoom and broaden our adult education offerings so that we're offering not only education to our parents in their homes, but we're giving them career education, we're giving them safe serve licenses, we're giving them biotech experiences, we're giving them certificates of advanced learning. Are we smart enough to do that? Because the technology is out there, the courses are out there. This is not rocket science or whatever you want to call it. Are we bold enough to have an aggressive program where we go to our parents where they are? We certainly need, and I'm preaching to the parents now, we need a citywide parent organization. As I said, I've been on every state initiative. I was on 7 years plus on the State Council Advisory Council, both as a parent and as an educator on diversity awareness, you name it. So I don't need to bore you with that background, but I've been in the fight for a long time, and it can be done, but it has to be collective, parents seeing the commonality in their circumstances and being able to demand. Most of what I've accomplished has to do, unfortunately, with demands and protests, whether it's as a parent, as a worker, or as an educator. When we did the Concerned Black Staff Report, people were not quite interested in that information. But it forced the district to publish annual data, which I'm back to, which you have to do. You have to see the problem, if I want to quote Baldwin, and address it before you can face it. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for your wisdom and years of and passion for staying, continuing to work on this issue and to make it right. Thank you.
Well, Lars, I must say, when people ask me, my self-interest is, it was a living, breathing person. And my current self-interest is still the living, breathing persons in Cambridge. So it's critical. We don't have a chance to sit. We don't have a chance to waste these resources. Our kids are coming back from a terrible loss of personal human contact, of quality education. And what they come back to has to be significantly better than what they left.
Yes, I totally agreed. Thank you. Kari Milner, Kari, are you on? Can I pull you in?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Lori and everyone else. Appreciate being able to be a part of the conversation this morning. Great to see you, Caroline. One of those warm bodies that you embraced. You know, thinking back, I'm Kari Milner. I'm co-director of the Agenda for Children for Out of School Time, also at Cambridge Public School, district administrator, also a product of the Cambridge Public Schools, also a product of the Algebra Project, and also have my family's 3 children currently in the Cambridge Public Schools. As Caroline mentioned, you know, as I was a young person growing up in Cambridge, I was exposed to adults doing big things. The activism of the African-American community, and particularly folks I knew in education, I didn't know how fortunate I was to be around folk doing that. The Concerned Black Staff, I think we used to call it CBS. And when I was a kid, I thought that was connected to the TV station. But, you know, they used to have cookouts, right? So that's what I knew. We used to get together, cook out with CVS. The educators would take care of each other, would take care of the younger folk, would take care of people coming into our system, into our community. And I think as we look at the report, the foundation put together, and thanks to Geeta and the whole team for doing that, what's in there is the story of how our community has had a really hard time staying together here. The communities of
As
color.
the lifting of most COVID restrictions are made.
And I also think the schools have played an important role, but of course we know the role of many other sectors, the role of many other policies, the role of many other institutions is pressing hard on our community and on our young people. So with that said, I could say a lot about that. Perhaps some of those topics will come up more today, but just in terms of wanting to stay focused on the school and on education, let me start by just maybe saying something that might be provocative to some people, maybe to others it won't be, but the concept of the achievement gap and the concept of the assessments that we use to define the achievement gap, really, they go hand in hand. And that thing is permanent. Okay. Now, I don't say that because I believe in some racial hierarchy, even though that's what the achievement gap and these tests were set up to show. I don't say that because I don't believe every young person has potential and I have expectations for them. I say that because that's what it was designed for. It was designed to show consistently that certain people could perform, quote unquote, higher on that particular measure, and certain people would perform lower across racial groups. And we still talk about it in this way. And so in our minds, whether we're fully conscious of it or not, we rank the races based on achievement on tests. And anyone who's been in education knows every young person is different. Anybody who has kids, every one of our children is different. We have different forms of achievement that we show and manifest. We have different talents, we have different interests. But we measure this one thing and we then decide how our schools are doing, how our kids are doing, how our teachers are doing. You know, you could just put people on a scale and say, like, what is your weight? And then start saying, what's the weight gap? Right? It's not that simple. There's so many contributing factors. So I bring that up because some of you know, about 3 years ago, we did something called the Building Equity Bridges Project in Cambridge Public Schools. The short of it is we were trying to look under some of these numbers. What are the persistent inequities we're seeing through data and what's contributing to them? So we had to actually, from the very beginning, take a step back and not only look at MCAS, even, you know, the SAT, which, you know, is sort of the forefather of the MCAS, and, you know, the IQ test, which really set the tone for all these exams and these assessments. And looked at, you know, other things that we know also show us, provide a window, if you will. We hear about like the number of staff of color, African-American, Black staff. We hear about, you know, the chronic absenteeism. We hear about young people having relationships with trusting adults. We have sort of enrollment in courses of honors and AP, you know, what happens after high school for young people, all these things. And the experiences of families, not just as young people in our schools. So with all that to say, we again see that through both quantitative and qualitative and participatory research, we find gaps, right? We find inequities, and we're trying to understand sort of what is it going to take to disrupt the things that are contributing to those. So on a higher level, you know, is this concept of the policies. And, you know, I mentioned the MCAS. I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I will say we have a very recent and current example of the state, you know, probably most states in this country forcing districts to do these standardized tests this spring. Coming out of COVID, you know, forcing educators, families, and everyone else to endure these exams in the middle of people coming back into school. You know, why is that, right? What is that focus about? Who does it benefit? And why is it that we couldn't continue to take a break from those? when we have superintendents, we have teacher unions, we have parents, we have really the teachers in the classrooms who are just, for the most part, up in arms on this. And, then, as a parent, and I'm a parent, like we could opt out, this concept of opting out of an exam. But real talk, there's white families who have opted out of our public schools because of these exams. People who have options opt out. People who, in some ways move out of even some of the public schools to look at sort of how charters deal with this work, maybe sometimes for the opposite reasons, like more focus on standardized tests. These are all twisted concepts. So I'm bringing it up just to say, like, on the policy level, there's something weird that happens where we're pushing and forcing ourselves to continue to do the same things that tell us the same story. We also know that how schools think about accountability is connected to policy. How we see right now, the elevation of the concept of how race impacts, so many things, in the concept of anti-racism, the critical race theory, more people are learning about now. These are things, again, we had the fortune of talking about when we were growing up, but you can see how the machine works, right? You read about it, folks. I hope you're seeing, in these different states, they're literally trying to outlaw the discussion of these concepts in public schools. That's what they do. They get ahead of this thing and they say, all right, just like the voting rights and access to registering and taking your votes, they use policy, right? So I bring this up because in Cambridge, we could really take a hard look at our policy. And I think we're hopefully going to be able to do that with this next administration. A lot of folks are interested in it. We might have done more with it this year if it hadn't been for COVID. And policy doesn't, save the day, but policy is an extremely powerful tool that's being used and will continue to be used to push back on progress. I'll also just mention that, sort of a lot of people stood up for George Floyd and, sort of to see more so what's going on out here with the interactions and sort of the concept of being a person of color in a community where police are supposed to be here to, protect and serve. And it's quite the opposite. And, people also seeing, how police officers are, who don't do a good job and are harming people, get protected, right? In many different ways. In our schools, we have, educators who are creating a different kind of harm. We have folks who have low expectations, as we hear. We have folks who actually, create trauma, who respond to entitlement in a different way than they do to people who don't look like them. And I'll just say that, the schools themselves, I think they're complicit in also allowing certain people to continue to be in our classrooms, not just in Cambridge, but like somebody who might leave, even Cambridge can show up in another district and start working with kids again and still contribute to some of the harm that we are experiencing for young people. Now, this isn't about pointing fingers at educators, right? Some of my best friends are educators, including my wife. And, this is not easy work. However, with all the folks doing the great work, we have to be able to stand up and be accountable to those who are creating harm, especially to our young Black and Brown students, starting at a very young age. And some of that, again, is baked into them. It's not all about like they come here with a mission to do this. Last thing I'll just mention, a little closer to the ground that we might be able to do here is the concept of the individual student success plan is something that I think we need to do some more work around. And when we think about each individual student, it allows us to think about their own potential to grow and their own potential to be their best. And that also includes looking beyond the classroom, even beyond the schoolhouse. And that's part of my work with the Agenda for Children, is working with out of school time partners and families. And if we're going to do individual student success plans, to include other voices to help understand the fullest picture of that young person as possible, also including that young person themselves and asking them about, what they think they're good at, their talents are, their strengths are, where they want to get better, and understand that we should start measuring young people, not just by these exams, but also by their interest in what they want to learn more about and how much they actually understand about their own surroundings. Because we know in Cambridge, as is in the report, with the quintiles and other ways to just, sort of disaggregate people are growing up very differently. And they come from very different households when they arrive into our schools and into our community programs. And it's so important that we value that, embrace that, and then help our young people to navigate this world.
Thank you, Kari. Thank you for your passion, your work, your wisdom. And I imagine, I hope you'll come back at another breakfast to talk to us about the strengths of out of school programs and how to use those as a significant piece in this. Ayesha Wilson, can I pull you into the conversation, please?
Yes, thank you, Lori and everybody for being on this call, but Lori for hosting. And, this is definitely a very important conversation, and obviously one that has been asked for decades. And as we continue to try to tackle it, I don't see my role as a, first term school committee member running for reelection lightly. I know that as being a kid from Cambridge, as Kari shared a story, his story of, Black educators in Cambridge, I think back to my kindergarten, first, second, and third grade experiences at the Maynard School. I think about Val Prescott, who was my kindergarten teacher, who understood that my mother, as a single mom raising two girls at that time, struggled. She worked, and from different times, maybe she was on welfare. And when my mom was working, childcare, after school childcare was always a problem. And so Val would often take my sister and I home with her at 808, and we would stay with her and her mother, Connie, who ran the 808 after school program. And so when my sister and I were old enough to attend that program, we did. So being a kid who grew up in North Cambridge, I went to school in the Port and I went to after school in the Coast. And that's what my mother had to do because that was the village that was helping to support us, right? And I think when Kari talks about community and how the Black and African-American community actually centers around our young people, we need to think about what does that look like and how do we bring that back into our school systems? What does it look like when an educator knows the challenges that our parents are facing and they create solutions, not perpetuate the problem? That's what we need in terms of, wraparound care, wraparound services and opportunities that are really going to help lift a family up versus keep them down. And so, as a school committee member, obviously COVID hit. I already had my own agenda, things that I wanted to tackle, the equity and access, all the stuff, universal pre-K, really closing the achievement gap, the opportunity gap, and really thinking about how do we lift up our Black and brown students, because I was that Black little girl in school 20 years ago. And that was me, that was my peers. I graduated with Ms. Hunter's daughter, right? So I understand the injustices that were experienced around me, or maybe even I experienced myself and really didn't understand it until now. And now 20 plus years later, it's still here. So, as we look at and think about, that roadmap to early college and the blessings that we can provide our young people, if we're able to really implement that in an intentional way, that could be huge for our city. And these are conversations that we have been having for a very long time. But now we need to put that talk into action. And that's why I like to always reference Ty Belletti in walking that talk. And really thinking about what does that look like? What are the dollars and how do we make those dollars make sense? And how do we make sure that that access is readily available to those who are the most marginalized students, so that they are the first ones in line for opportunities like that. Before I even talk about, well, I already talked about early college, but I think I need to take a step back and really think about the social determinants of life. So as I spoke about my mother's experience, right? And understanding that how many of our Black and brown children are living in low income households, What does that look like on, you know, the experiences that they're having, the baggage that the students then wear when they go into a classroom, and how are we preparing our educators for educating young people who have a lot of other things going on in their minds. I remember through my work with the workforce program, part of Cambridge Housing Authority, I had to be a liaison with deans of students to let them know, oh no, you know, little Bobby, you know, he's not showing up because they had to do an emergency move, a relocation that just happened. And the school wasn't aware, but the housing, you know, they're moving families around because they're renovating units and all this other stuff. Now that's hard for families to have to pack up their homes and have to move, you know, when housing says it's time, and understanding that young people still have to go into school and try to learn, think about math concepts, history, all this other stuff, when they're dealing with so much stuff in their home life, cultural differences, you know, all sorts of things, whether it's even substance uses and abuses and domestic violence and things like that that are happening in the homes. And that's not just in the homes of Black and brown children. Let me be very clear. But when it is happening and you're already dealing with homes that are low income homes, that exacerbates the challenges that the young person then experiences, and then how they have to tackle and come and show up and be a student, or what we want to call a scholar, in our school spaces. How do we set them up for success when they're already somewhat set up to fail because they're challenges that they're experiencing? So, you know, we have to put a focus there. When our students, the Black Student Union, created their minority reports back in 2017, they spoke very vividly about the challenges that they were experiencing in their schools, about the inequities of AP courses and how teachers would look at them and speak to, you should be lucky, or you should feel great that you're in this space. What? I earned that, you know, like I worked hard. I'm a scholar. That's why I'm here. You know, don't give me that extra pat as if it's shocking that I'm in an AP course. That should be normal. And again, this goes back to the growth mindset. This goes back to how are we empowering our young people each and every day to feel like they are great learners in these spaces, and not just because of the color of their skin that somehow they were able to miraculously get here, but that they worked hard to actually get there. The other piece that we, you know, the individualized success plans, and I know my colleague, David Weinstein's on the call, and you know, Rachel Weinstein, you'll hear from in a little bit, but just, you know, as we think about and talk about the individualized success plans, that is going to be a huge step into how we are really looking at the individual child and thinking about what are going to be the intentional resources and supports that's going to get this young person to be successful. And how do we map that out? And how do we be intentional with wraparound services? If they're involved in a youth program, if they're involved in sports, if they're involved in our youth centers, that we're wrapping our arms around each and every one of those children and really thinking about, you know, you're at the Gate League, you're at, you know, you play the sports after that, you're in this program even after that. And how do we raise and wrap our arms around, around each of our students when it comes to thinking and lifting each and every one of those programs that are supporting this young person, and understand that Cambridge constantly operates in a silo. Every program is in its own bucket. And I think through the great work that Kari is doing with the Agenda for Children and really thinking about how to streamline, make connections, really think about how programs like the workforce and many others are able to have Aspen access so that we can see our young people's grades, so that we can be intentional in having conversations with the educators. We have those waivers that are set up, but we know that there's more that needs to be done there, right? We know that it needs to be a more, maybe even a more robust system of how we're looking across the board, and how educators and community providers are being intentional in sharing the messages of what we're learning, what's happening at home, and how that might impact and show up in a school day. what's happening at school that might affect and
You
impact
find
him.
it so hard.
You're watching the Minority Report, Lori.
I was just trying to put that in the chat, sorry.
No, it's a beautiful one. And I often lead with that. And I do encourage everyone to please check it out. The Black Student Union Minority Report, start from volume 1. They have 4 of them every year. They have produced one. But I think in closing, I think the piece around we're doing the same thing and expecting different results is real. And we really need to go back to what Ms. Hunter said about our leadership, our vision, and our courage. And that's low-hanging fruit, to really think about having robust leadership, having robust vision, having a great courage, and expecting that all of our young people can be successful and actually going to work on that. And really doing a great evaluation of our educators and our leaders, and thinking about, if you don't match where we're going, you might be good, but not good enough for Cambridge. And it's time to go. We have to be able to start leading with that, and really thinking about, as we have, yes, we have great charter schools here in Cambridge, and many of our families go to those charter schools. And I want to shout out Becky Norris and Ted Hirsch, who's on the call. But, we got to think about, what are those discrepancies? What is happening from our elementary schools into our middle schools, where our students technically start to go into our charter programs, and then maybe they come back for high school, or maybe they stay. That's another report that we need to look into, and really start to build on the answers there. And I think in closing, I'll just say, if our kids are not reading by 3rd grade, the challenges for the rest of their life is going to be hard. Okay, so if we're not being intentional there, if we don't have a commitment to making sure that every single one of our kids are reading, and we just need to say that, right? Like, we need to say, I am committed to making sure all of our students are reading by 3rd grade, and any student after 3rd grade who is not reading on reading level, they will have intentional tutoring, supports, whatever it takes, so that we catch up, because that is our responsibility as a school district. And if we are not doing that, we have a major problem, and we will continuously set our young people up for failure if they don't have those basic skills met. So I know we're going to continue this robust conversation. I'll pause there. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Ayesha. Thank you so much for pushing us all. And we have lots of work to do. Thank you. Rachel Weinstein, can I pull you into the conversation?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lori, and thank you all for being here. It's really an honor to join you for this conversation. And I want to just build off of what Ayesha just said, because I think, to the framing question of why are we still here, it's not just everyone on this call who holds our values, or at least our professed values, are aligned. Like, that is true within the school district and the city as well. And yet it's the institutional culture and the institutional racism that's getting in the way. And so while I don't believe in trickle-down economics, but I do believe that organizational culture is built at the top. And so, to Ayesha's point, when our goals for Black and Brown children are that not even half of them will be proficient or advanced in 3rd grade, that trickles down. That trickles down to teachers thinking that kids might not be able to. And then that, most importantly, that gets internalized by our babies. And then that's how the gap grows. And so it's that institutional culture, and I think Kari referred to it being baked in, that we need to work on. And that I think, I didn't even introduce myself, but I will say, as a first-term school committee member, that I'm learning to butt my head against. So I should say, I'm Rachel Weinstein. I too am a product of the Cambridge Schools K-12. I have a 7th grader at Vassal Lane, and I'm on the school committee with my sister in service, Ayesha, and with David, who's on the call. We're a good team. So I definitely think that part of why we're still here is that institutional culture. I think there are some really obvious things around goals and expectations around curricula reflecting our children. There are many very obvious barriers, right? You know, you look at this fall, the superintendent appointed a group of advisors to create metrics for opening and closing schools. It was a predominantly white group. Then a couple of us pushed really hard to respond to the communities of color that were saying, you know, we're disproportionately impacted by COVID. Why aren't we the ones setting the metrics? And then, so we pushed hard, we had a conversation. Then at that point, the folks of color who were brought in felt tokenized, which they were, right? So that should have never happened in the first place. The group that was put together in the first place should have been representative of our children and our staff. And we know that is possible. The mayor once pushed, you know, the mayor pulled it together in a matter of days. So why couldn't the district do that in a matter of months? So those are kind of just like the very, very obvious examples. Some things that give me hope. We have a couple representatives, I think, from Cambridge Street Upper School on the call, and their principal there, Manuel Fernandez, is moving into an interim role as Chief Equity Officer. And the reason I'm hopeful about this being a catalyst for some of the changes that we need in the culture in the district is that he's facilitated conversations around race with his team for years, and they've really digested and internalized the anti-racist work. And so I know Manuel is really interested in coaching principals. I think that is key. So that, I think, will be one piece. I know Kari has been the champion working on facilitating the development of an anti-racist mission and vision, and the superintendent, the outgoing superintendent, just mentioned that we now have a set of anti-racist look-fors for when teachers are observed. And frankly, I think, and this gets back to what a few of my colleagues have said here, you know, that in this society, we measure what matters, or you know, for something to matter, we have to measure it. And so while these look-fors may be this safe way of doing it, I still continue to believe that we should be evaluating principals and educators based on the experience and the growth of the students in their care. And so if that means my Latinx girls aren't feeling as safe as my white girls on the, you know, that is how I'm evaluated. And how is each group of students with disabilities or Black boys progressing? Do the students with disabilities feel that they are expected to achieve at the same levels as their neurotypical peers? That kind of thing. So I worked really hard on the interim superintendent search with many of you who are on this call. It was a great community effort. And I do hope to see Dr. Greer come in and work with the committee to move in this direction. A couple other thoughts. About a year ago, I reached out to Lori and Janet Green around white people needing to do our work, right? And in the course of this exploration, I learned that a number of our educators were already doing some really important steps, leading workshops for white families around opportunity hoarding and not taking up more teacher time and energy than, and therefore not giving teachers space to build that relationship with families of color. There are a number of schools now that are facilitating conversations for white staff and white families by reading White Supremacy and Me. I think that is crucial work that needs to continue. In addition to, and I also am glad to see CCSC, Becky and Ted here, because what that school is known for is that they really heard from their educators of color that there was a culture change needed and did the hard work. And now when I work in education in Boston as my quote unquote day job. When I talk to educators of color, that's the school they want to go to because there's critical mass and there's a culture that they feel supported. And so we need to continue thinking about, you know, yes, we've gotten better at hiring teachers of color, but we don't retain them. And I think one really powerful development is these employee resource groups that have, there's a Black employee resource group, there's an Educators of Color Coalition, there's a whole bunch of them. And I'm hopeful that that might also be a piece of building the culture we need in this district. But we might also need to think about how do we have critical mass in each of our buildings of educators of color who can support one another and tip the culture. So both Ayesha and I participated in building equity bridges before deciding to run. So I also, hats off to Kari and that team for inspiring us and informing us. And I think we continue to come back to those 9 barriers to racial equity and driving so much of our work. So one of the things we pushed this last year was a weekly individual check-in call, because we were thinking about what is that lack of relationships, and that's a whole other session. You can come to the school climate meeting on Tuesday if you want to talk more about that. 6 o'clock, we're going to focus on that. But the idea was that every child needs to have a champion. And this is really a step towards the individualized success plans that David and Ayesha are talking about, where we should not just have that relationship, but in fact, a personalized plan that speaks to a young person's interests and skills and supports. I have a lot more to say, but I know we want to get to question and answer. I saw there was a lot of talk in the chat about dual enrollment, which is also a potential tool. In short, I guess what I'll say is I think that the work, that the shift that's needed is going to be a combination of shifting the internal culture and the institutional racism and becoming an anti-racist district. And then I think it was Ms. Hunter who said this earlier, the external organizing. So we now have the Cambridge Families of Color Coalition, there's MBK. I think it's having that, she was talking about a citywide parent group, but yes, I think that external pressure that outlasts any one of us on the school committee, any superintendent, that is going to be the power needed to really do this work. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Adrian Wallace, can I bring you into the conversation and sort of moderating some further conversation amongst everyone?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again, Lori, for bringing folks together, and thanks to everybody who can stay. I know some folks have to hop off at 9. I want to just say a couple of things and ask, hopefully, what feels like the right next question. So Toni Morrison said that definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. And I think, I heard Ms. Hunter, Kari, Ayesha, and Rachel really sort of hone in on that point in different ways, primarily with respect to centering the concerns and needs of Black students and parents, right? So it isn't just, let's throw out solutions, because, as Ms. Hunter said when she started, right, we've known what many of those solutions can be for some time and just haven't had the courage and vision to implement them. Like Kari said, we've known about alternative ways to measure student progress. We've known we need to ask the students and center their experiences, and yet haven't had that leadership and change. And Ayesha speaking from her own experience about how a Black teacher had, further understanding of where she was coming from and what her mom was going through, all the way to Rachel saying, let's think strategically about having the right tools in the right moment, not only to evaluate what our students are learning, but the climate that they're in, how safe they feel, how if they can actually talk to a teacher, if a teacher recognizes who they are. So I think with all that said, and in the chat, we've seen lots of folks throwing out what they deem to be their solution. I want to ask a 2-part question. Folks are definitely engaged, folks who are on this call, right? How do we continue to center on Black voices and Black solutions? And what should folks who are in the chat throwing out ideas, that's great, but like, what should you do if you're a person who's engaged and interested in this issue of educational inequality, and you want to go past typing stuff into a chat? What's the next step for you to take that respects and honors and listens to Black voices, but also takes action to push the needle forward? I'd love to hear from you all on that question.
Well, if it's a jump-in question, I certainly will. I think what you can do is you can get involved. There are all kinds of ways to get involved, as a mentor, as an advocate, as an organizer, as a researcher, as a citizen who shows up at school committee meetings and constantly or often raises that agenda. So, again, I'm back to this issue of who's in charge and what they are doing and how do we make them accountable. So being a part of an accountability model and figuring out where your individual skills can be put to work. As a volunteer, if you work for the city, what kind of accountability do we have? And what are the metrics? We're back to, and I agree with you, Kari, that we have to have all kinds of measures for our children. And we start off, once we see the inequity, with plotting solutions. I think when we publish data, there should be some solutions. And I want to bring it back to the data report. We not just reported data. We had a whole series of steps that the district could do to change the situation. When we started, the scholarship program was not developed. We helped develop the scholarship program, bring in parent coordinators, which we didn't have at the high school. So for those who want to get involved, it's about being a part of developing the solutions now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'll just add that, you know, to Ms. Hunter, we have to make sure that we're voting for people who are, who really have some aligned visions on what's going to take us to the next step. You know, I was, you know, shout myself out and my colleagues that are on the call out and just say, we're running for re-election, right? Like, we want to continue to do this work, and we have that bold vision that's going to take us there. We understand that this is not work that can be done overnight. This is work that will take some time, but you've got to get folks who are committed and dedicated to doing this work and holding our leadership accountable, our administration accountable, and understanding that, again, how do we bring the collective minds and voices together? When we're going for races every 2 years, and it could be different people coming in, different people going out, it disrupts a little bit because there's a lack of consistency. And that's a challenge too. So I want to make sure that we understand this is a voting year. Please get out and make sure that you vote and tell your friends and think about, where do we really want to see Cambridge in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years? I don't want to be having this conversation about the injustices, especially for our Black and brown kids, 20 years from today. I will not be a part of that legacy. I want to be a part of building Cambridge to be the Cambridge that we should be, the one that is equitable for all, and especially raising and lifting up our Black and brown students. And I know that my colleagues who are on this call on the school committee are for that same fight. And so I just want to lift that into this space. And I know someone put in the chat, I think it was Becky Norris from the CCSC, We Want to Do More Than Survive by Dr. Benita Love, yeah. The Abolitionist Thinking. This is a fabulous book that folks need to be reading and thinking about. How do we think about our young people? How do we, encourage and engage them and support them? And as Ms. Hunter said, being a mentor, that's something Ms. Hunter has been championing, and I want to get on that, Ms. Hunter, that we need to really start a mentorship program for our Black and brown students, because that's going to be critically important. Thank you.
I can chime in. I think for each person who has this question of how do I get involved, what can I do? The important word you start with is I, right? So take a look in the mirror and then take a look beyond the mirror. Take a look at how you came up, what your life experience was, who you've benefited from, learning from, being exposed to, and try to understand yourself and what you might be able to bring. Right? There's this concept of, entitlement and privilege, and often white privilege. And I think that we ask people to kind of first own that, hopefully understand what how it impacts our community when it's leveraged, when it's put upon folks, but more importantly, what you can do with it towards creating positive change, right? And what you can do in terms of working with folk of color and how you share things, and ask yourself, can I make space for others? Very personally, start very personally. It's not easy. I mean, statistics show, like most of us, we don't really, Cambridge is a bit different. As a young person who grew up here, I had the benefit in our schools. There was a lot of mix of who was in our classrooms. But, folks who are older, and from different parts of the country, you don't really get to know people from different backgrounds. You don't have a lot of Black and brown people you hang out with. And that's the way our society's been set up. And because of that, how do you do this work? How do you, that's why it's such a question. What can I do? How can I help? But maybe I don't quite understand these dynamics. Please stay with it, is what I'm going to say. It can be discouraging. It can be tiring. And in some ways, no bullshit, keep it to yourself. Like, we don't want to hear how tired you are and how frustrated you are, and how this is exhausting, and how you want to turn the volume down on this, and it's so much. It is a lot. But just imagine, growing up and having to wake up every morning. You can say hi to the sun, and you say hi to racism. It's a double dip. I guess I also just want to mention that we have an opportunity to hold ourselves and our community accountable. We have an opportunity to share with our young people the knowledge that you have. A lot of people don't even know what a money manager is, an accountant. These things are foreign concepts often in our community. And overall, we have to be able to live in some discomfort in order to grow. Right. So when it starts to feel hard, it starts to feel awkward, it starts to feel even painful, something's happening. We're in the right place. Stay in here with us. Keep pushing. And I think overall, remember, public schools, right? The word is public, right? So it's really a reflection of our society, of our public. And we have to understand, like, if we want to shift what the public is like, what this country is like, what our communities are like, starts in our schools, in our public schools. The public schools take anybody who walks through the door. There's no turning anybody away. Everybody's welcome. That's a public institution. We need to embrace that, support our public schools, do our best to support the educators, the families, and the young people, the leaders, but hold us accountable and hold them accountable. And we do have a small enough city and enough resources that we can really, I believe, that's why I show up, and get up every day motivated. We can do something about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kari. I definitely see a lot of resonance with that in the chat. And Rachel, I'm wondering if maybe you can add a piece on about that ally piece, because I imagine some folks are feeling like that. I want to put my voice in the space, but maybe I don't want to speak over other people. How do you get that balance? And how do you, to Kari's point, kind of work on living in that discomfort? Because we all have to be on our learning edge. And if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. So I'd love if you could speak a little more to that.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Adrian. So let me just say really explicitly, I'm somebody for whom the public school system worked, right? As a white girl going through it, I had a great experience in the Cambridge public schools. And it was clear to me going through the grades that my classes got more racially segregated, though I was in pilot, so that by design was heterogeneous. And Ayesha and I both were, and Phyllis is on the call. Pilot was a special school within a school. But I think the first thing is for us white folks to say, like, even if we had a good experience in the schools and in the systems, this is real. This is not, just because we had a good experience doesn't mean that these problems are not real, and really owning that and seeing that. And I will say I am parent of a young girl of color, and I see it firsthand. And I just hope that I can bring that experience as a mom to other white folks and say, like, this is real, this is real, this is real. My child, I can list for you the hurtful things that have been said to my child by adults in our system that turn her off to school. And it's painful to say that. So that's number one, just acknowledge the facts that Kari just laid out, right? That when the sun goes up, racism's still alive and well. In terms of, and yes, it is uncomfortable, and I have been called out publicly in many forums, and that's part of it. That's what, we have to make our mistakes and keep showing up and keep learning, and not get turned off by the blindness, because we all swim in this racist society, and we're all, as Adrian said, if we're not uncomfortable, we're not doing the work. So that's a second reminder. The third thing I will say, and I referenced the Cambridge families of color earlier, is for white family members on this call, I'm pretty sure CFCC has a white allies list. just get on their list and they will tell you when they need you to support what they are leading, what the families of color are leading, and show up as an ally and follow their lead. I know on certain issues, I will be quiet and turn to Ayesha and other people of color to lead and back them up. But so I think that's kind of a combination of my reflections, Adrian, if that's helpful.
That is, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Geeta, I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the foundation's role, right? We've sort of talked about the individual piece and what folks can do to get involved. And a couple folks just shared, I think, some great resources about potential mentorship programs. So check those out in the chat. But Geeta, what do you think the foundation's role is in pushing this conversation forward so that, like Ayesha said, we really can't be having the same conversation even 5 years from now? We have to be in a different place. So what is the foundation committed to doing or looking to do to continue to push things forward with some real speed?
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. And I will actually disagree with Kari a little bit to say, every one of you keep doing your own thing. I think we need a collective agenda. You know, when I first came to Cambridge 6 years ago to work here, someone said to me, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to Cambridge. And this person said, no, you're not going to Cambridge. You're going to the People's Republic of Cambridge, where everyone has an opinion and every opinion is right. And I think that is a problem that Cambridge has, that we all identify a problem and we all do it separately. We need some collective power. I love the idea of a coalition of parents, you know, organizing our community. And I'm hoping that the role that we can play is as the supporter of these kinds of ideas. You know, we recently actually found out about the Coalition of Families of Color. And I mean, there are these very grassroots efforts that are in our community that need to be nurtured, that need to be supported. And I would really urge those philanthropists who are on this call to join with us to support those organizations who are doing this organizing work and, you know, need the, whether it's research or staffing or resources for the kids to be able for us to come together and have a collective voice and say, we need to create change. I mean, I love the idea of you know, getting your vote out, making your voice heard. But let's do it in a way that can lead to some collective action. One of the things we're hoping that will come out of this report is a series of conversations that will coalesce an agenda. You know, that where we come together and say, here are the 3 things that we must change, and we will work with everyone to organize the business community. We are the power of a neutral entity is that we can call on anyone and we can push anyone and not have that feeling of there's a vested interest here. We are your community foundation. We are the community foundation of Cambridge. And we will do what it takes to work with our community on things that need to change, that need to be pushed. You know, I really want us to really think hard about the data that I presented up front, about the power, the privilege, the money, the resources that Cambridge has. Who are we building Cambridge for? Who are we doing this for? If we cannot support our children, if we cannot support the workforce program, which puts out, you know, 60 children every year into college and look at their results, it's outstanding. And yet we cannot get our public sector to support that. You know, there's something wrong with this picture. And I think what it will take is going to be collective action. And what I'm hoping, and Kari, you know, I love you. you're my go-to person for everything. I think we need collective action. And I know that you believe in that too. So I look forward to working with everyone. And I'd say, you can see the powerhouse we have over here in Adrian Wallace. So that's going to be our go-to person to help us organize everyone. So thank you everyone for all you're already doing, but let's do it together.
Yeah, thank you, Geeta. I think also if you are like bursting, you know, with an idea and you want to bring some people together to do it, like reach out to us. It doesn't mean that, you know, it happens instantaneously, but we want to be in conversation and be talking with you about those ideas. Ms. Hunter, I see you have something to share. We're listening.
I am bursting, Gita, because I have a challenge to you. I agree with you about collective action. And I don't think we're going to get a citywide parent organization overnight, but I think the Cambridge Community Foundation has the resources, and I will donate myself to it, to host the first Parent Congress, where we expect representatives from every school, from every housing development, from every segment of the community, and we work to get them there and produce, and we have the resources here, MBK, Parents of Color Task Force, Kathy Reddick, former NAACP president, Ken Reeves on the call. We have the civic talent to be able to empower our parents. We're not teaching our parents, but to empower our parents about what it means to be an advocate, how to use the advocacy of the Department of Education when you need it for your child's resources. We may have to turn over some apple carts, but that's what I'm all about. But I challenge the Cambridge Foundation to put some money on parent education, and I will join you however I can.
Absolutely. Thank you. We will.
Thank you.
Chime in one more time.
Yes, of course. Please do.
Thank you. Thank you, Gita and Dr. Hunter. Yes, I hear you, Gita. And just to point of clarification, and if it came across that this is about the individual work, it's not. This is about the collective. Anyone who knows me, who's worked with us, knows what we do is we convene. We bring folks from different backgrounds, different stakeholders, and we center Black and Brown folks in terms of voices, in terms of issues, in terms of needs. And, you know, the Cambridge Families of Color Coalition, that came out of the work of Building Equity Projects, or BEB, I should say, Building Equity Bridges. It's been a while since we've talked about it in that way, intentionally, because these issues are bigger than any project. Just to sort of reiterate, what I am pushing for and what I think we need to push for is when you show up to a coalition or you show up to a group of diverse stakeholders, you better be ready to do your own work to be able to engage with people respectfully and to not perpetuate some of the harm, some of the isms, and some of the pieces, which sometimes are blind spots for people. And for us to move this as far as we can, that's also a part of it. So it's both the individual and the collective are both necessary. And as Dr. Bettina Love says, you know, at the end of the day, we have to abolish some things, okay? We don't have to modify or change or sort of tweak or fix. Some of this shit is not fixable. We have to abolish it. And so when you have to step up and abolish something, you better be able to trust the people you're working with. And so let's make sure we are connecting and doing this work absolutely together in a parent Congress as well.
Yes, Ayesha, jump on in.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, Kari. Like, that's definitely the roadmap of where we need to be, right? Is like abolishing some things and just, you know, not trying to, you know, as it was said earlier, redo the same thing over and over, expecting different outcomes. Like, we have to just maybe cut it off and rebuild and do it all over again with the right people at the table making it happen. And I think when we talk about the right people at the table making it happen, I definitely want to lift some people into this space. You know, it was already said, the Cambridge Families of Color Coalition, the great work that they are doing and being parent advocates and really building more and thinking about how to create a parent university that is, you know, in the works, was adopted in the budget. And, you know, again, the city council is going to, will be voting tonight on our school committee budget. So we look forward to that. And we know Patty Nolan and maybe other councilors are on the call today. I want to also uplift President Ken Reeves, former mayor Ken Reeves of the NAACP, into this space and all of the great work that he has done around researching and looking into especially educating our Black and Brown students. I mean, I personally have had calls with President Reeves, as I am the secretary of the NAACP Cambridge, on where are we gone wrong? Like, what is this problem? And why haven't we fixed it? Why haven't you fixed it, Mayor Reeves? No, I'm kidding. But I mean, in terms of why are we still here and what does this look like in order to fix? Is there another city across the country that's similar to Cambridge, spending the dollars that Cambridge does with better outcomes than Cambridge has, right? And President Mayor Reeves has said, maybe there's a place, I think in Maryland, is that Ms. Ken? And you know, we got to look into that and really think about where are some other districts across the country that have a makeup similar to Cambridge, spending dollars similar to Cambridge, $30,000 plus per pupil in our city, and producing better outcomes than what we're producing. We have a lot of work to do. I also want to lift up a mentorship program, Friday Night Hype, and I know one of its founders, Kenny, is on the call. And they've been a recipient of funding through the Cambridge Community Foundation. They are doing fabulous work with our middle schoolers, and they continue to do this work. We want to continue to support them. They are not funded through our schools. They're just on the ground. They are caring educators, caring, you know, Kenny is a woman from Cambridge as well, a kid from Cambridge. So we are talking about caring folks who want to make sure that our kids get their best needs met and have great mentors in doing this. And middle school is really where I say is the make or break of kind of your life, right? Like either you could go right or you could go wrong in middle school. A lot happens right in middle school. And so I'm really wanting to lift up and bring those people into the spaces. And then, you know, there's other folks from the, you know, the CPAC community, you know, Mercedes, Delika, you know, who are on this call, who do the great work of making sure that our parents, our students with special needs are that we're reframing and rethinking how we're educating our kids and really starting from the ground of like science and reading and science and what does that look like? And are we in Cambridge where we are spending the most dollars doing the best work with what we have? You know, I want to lift up my brother's keeper, and when Ty and Tony talk about Cambridge as being resource rich but coordinated poor, that's a big deal. To be spending as much money as rich as Cambridge is, to be really coordinated as poorly as we are. This is why our results are taking us nowhere, and that we have to really reframe and reshape how we're moving as we go forward. And it starts with our leadership. And I'll just go back to plugging. It's time to vote, y'all. Make sure you know who you're voting for in November. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I know that we are approaching time, and I want to try to string a few thoughts together. I don't think we can put a nice bow on this, right? That's not the point. We're here to get uncomfortable. We're here to get serious. But I do want to say that I heard folks consistently talking about looking inward to do the individual change that you need to be able to do to show up. So just want to plug and remind folks on that. And also to show up to do the things that are uncomfortable, that are organized and led by folks of color, but also to speak up when you see an issue, so that it doesn't just sort of fly past and doesn't get addressed. Show up to the events, make the things happen. Don't let your elected officials forget, vote, right? Do all of the things that you need to do and throw it within your power. Look to the chat to check out Friday Night Hype, see the mentorship programs. Folks have messaged me with already some of their ideas. So continue to bring your ideas to the table, continue to talk about them. We have to work individually, but we also have to work, as Geeta reminded us, collectively. And I just want to say, you know, we've talked a lot about where we haven't seen Black children achieve what we've wanted to, and that's because of decisions that we've made. But I also want to remind you that there is so much strength, power, and accomplishment and excellence in the Black community. And you know, to Ayesha's point about being coordinated poor, when we don't highlight those things, when we don't understand and invest in those things and see them in our children, we end up in the situation where we stagnate around the things that are negative, instead of using the strengths and the power there to continue to see change move forward. So thank you so much, Lori. I will toss it back over to you if there's anything you want to add in closing. But again, thank you all so much for being present in this space and for sharing your breakfast moment with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Adrian, for moderating the conversation brilliantly. Thank you, Ms. Hunter and Kari and Ayesha and Rachel and Gita for joining this morning. And I hope everyone still on the call will join in the conversation with my brother's keeper tomorrow evening at 6:30. It's in the chat and was in my letter on Public Square. And we'll come back for further conversations. And help make sure that this happens this time, that we don't let this moment slip so that we're back here 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, having a similar conversation. But thank you for all of you who are making sure that doesn't happen. Thank you, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
Adrian.
And
Awesome.
Adrian,
you,
yes,
everyone.
good job.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Gita.
Thank you all.
Lori.
Have a good day.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
To be continued.
Take care.
For sure.